Welcome to today's presentation. My name is Paul Poiker, and I'm the archivist for the Moravian Church in America, Northern Province. We are glad that you are here with us today. The topic of today's presentation is Louise von Hayn and the origins of one of her hymns, Weil ich Jesu Schäflein bin, or as it is known in English, Jesus Makes My Heart Rejoice. This year is the 300th birthday of the author of this hymn, Louise von Hayn. Moravian Archives would like to recognize this anniversary with today's presentation. When I was doing research for my book on early Herrnhut, I came across something that sheds unexpected light on the origins of the hymn. More about that later. During today's presentation, I will talk about Louise von Hayn's life, how she joined the Moravians, and about Jesus Makes My Heart Rejoice, or as it is known in the original German, Weil ich Jesu Schäflein bin. We're not so much going to analyze the text of the hymn, discover all the biblical references that she makes, or compare the different translations. If that is something you would like to do, I encourage you to take screenshots because I have several slides that show the different versions next to each other. We are well informed about the life of Louise von Hayn. Dr. Elizabeth Schneider-Böcklen, Lutheran pastor in Bavaria, wrote an extensive biography based on thorough archival research. Her book is titled Amen, yea, my lot is blessed, which is a line from Jesus Makes My Heart Rejoice. It came out in 2009. And Elizabeth Schneider-Böcklen has done research in many archives, including the archives in Herrnhut. Unfortunately, the archives of the single sister's house in Herrnhut, where Louise von Hayn lived, burned at the end of the Second World War during the Great Fire of Herrnhut, and only a few items survive. For my presentation today, I have relied heavily on Schneider-Böcklen's book. Henriette Louise von Hayn was born on May 22nd, 1724, in a noble family in Idstein, Germany. Idstein is located 25 miles or 37 kilometers northwest of Frankfurt. Her father's name was Georg Heinrich von Hayn, and her mother was Ernestine Eberhardine von Lasberg. Idstein was the residence of Count Nassau Idstein, and Louise's father was a Oberjägermeister at the court. An Oberjägermeister is in charge of all matters relating to hunting in the county. Hunting at that time was often the prerogative of the nobility. That means that Louise grew up in a prominent family. In her memoir, she describes herself as a particular pious child. She mentions that as a child, she owned a Moravian catechism that she carried around with her. But as pious she may have been, she did something unexpected, something that changed her life. It also shows something about her personality, strong-willed and self-confident, and having a great desire to live in a community. In 1744, when she was 20 years old, she left her parents and her siblings and joined the Moravians. Joining the Moravians was not a minor thing in the 1740s. The Moravians were a controversial group at the time. Joining the Moravians meant leaving one's traditional family connections, living in one of their communities, and becoming part of a very different structure. Hayn writes in her memoir that on the morning of October 21st, 1744, like every morning, she was reading to her father. That morning, she read a passage from Matthew 10. He that loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. This text hit her in such a way that she put down the Bible and went to her room, wrote a letter to her parents, packed her things, and left the house. The letter she took with her and mailed from the next town, probably in an attempt to delay the moment her parents found out and also to give her a lead. It didn't help. In Frankfurt, Louise was caught and taken back to her parents in Idstein. Interestingly, only 2 weeks later, on November 5th, 1744, her parents allowed her to visit Herrenhaag, the Moravian community. According to her memoir, people had advised her parents to let Louise go to Herrenhaag so she could see for herself what the Moravians were really like, and then she would quickly realize her mistake and return home. Or at least that was the expectation. So that day, Louise von Hayn left for Herrenhaag. The visit was supposed to be just that, a visit. But Louise did not want to leave. So when Louise did not return home, a correspondence between Father von Hayn and Zinzendorf developed. Because Louise's father insisted on his parental authority over their unmarried daughter, the Moravians sent her back to her parents on June 24th, 1745. Back in Idstein, she was pressured by secular and religious authorities. Louise, however, remained determined and returned to Herrenhaag. When and how exactly this happened is not known, but a few months later we find her back in Herrenhaag. She was received into the Moravian Church and admitted to Holy Communion on January 30th, 1746. These events say a lot about Louise von Hayn's person. Against the will of her parents, despite the pressure from high-ranking men in the Lutheran Church to convince her of the opposite, she was determined to go back to Herrenhaag. Rather than living with her physical parents, she preferred to be part of a community where she found a new family. She describes her arrival in the Moravian community as follows. I left a pair of loving parents, but here it was as though I found 100 fathers and mothers all at once. I sensed the hearts of all the dear brothers and sisters toward me, and I really felt like a child that has returned from abroad to its mother's house and has come back to its own kind. It is a wonderful description of what people can experience in a radical community. This is a wax portrait of Louise von Hayn, showing her with the Haube, the Moravian cap. It is in the Unity Archives in Herrnhut. Wax relief portraits are relatively rare because they are so fragile and often do not survive. There is some obvious damage to this portrait. There appears to be a crack between her head and her shoulders, and a bow has come disconnected. Still, it gives us an idea of what Louise von Hayn looked like. In the Moravian Church, Louise von Hayn became a teacher. She taught in the girls' school that was located in Herrenhaag and Marienborn. These two locations were close to each other, 5 miles apart, and the girls' school moved back and forth between the two places repeatedly. In 1748, Louise von Hayn was ordained. The ordination of women was unusual in the 18th century. The Moravians practiced the ordination of women as early as 1745. Before that, women were elders and chief elders, and they preached. We know that other 18th century groups outside of the established churches allowed women to preach, for example, the Methodists and the Quakers. But I do not know if any of these groups formalized this by ordaining women. The Moravians stopped ordaining women after 1790 and then reintroduced the ordination of women in 1967. Louise von Hayn was ordained a deaconess. Moravians also ordained women to priestesses or presbyters starting in 1758. However, there are indications that Zinzendorf ordained 9 women as presbyter as early as 1746. Louise von Hayn is listed among these women. What we do not understand yet is if that is correct and she had become a presbyter in 1746, why she was ordained again in 1748 to deaconess, which is a lower degree than presbyter. Many things about ordination in the Moravian Church during these years are still unclear and need further research. What we do know is that Louise von Hayn was well respected and had a position of authority within the church. Soon, she became the head teacher of the school, which she remained during the following 16 years and during 2 more moves of the girls' school. We find Louise's name among the delegates to synods. In 1766, she became the Pflegerin, or choir worker of the Single Sisters House in Herrnhut. This was an important position. She was responsible for the well-being and spiritual care of 400 single women who lived in the Herrnhut Sisters House. She would live here until her death. On August 27, 1782, Henriette Louise von Hayn died in Herrnhut. She was 59 years old. This photo was taken on the day of her 300th birthday earlier this year. We see her headstone on the God's Acre in Herrnhut. She left quite some texts behind. We have 7 letters written by Henriette Louise in the Unity archives. There are 2 letters in the Moravian archives here in Bethlehem, and probably there are letters in other collections as well. There are 14 discourses or sermons that she gave, and they are all held in the archives in Herrnhut. And then she left hundreds of hymns. Many of Louise von Hayn's hymns were included in printed hymn books, sometimes heavily edited by Christian Gregor. The current American Moravian Book of Worship contains 4 of her hymns. There are 5 of her hymns in the current German Moravian Hymn Book of 2007. Although versions of her Jesus Makes My Heart Rejoice used to be included in various Protestant hymn books in the past, I think her hymns have mostly disappeared from non-Moravian hymn books. The traditional opening hymn of the Easter morning sunrise service is also written by Louise von Hayn. Her most famous hymn is Weil ich Jesu Schäflein bin, or Jesus Makes My Heart Rejoice. Because it's so popular among Moravians, it has been translated into many languages. It is also known outside the Moravian Church. You will find the hymn in many older German and English hymnals, and when you Google it, you will find many results. Of course, the text of the hymn, talking about sheep and shepherds, fits very well with Moravian iconography. So, what do we know about the origins of this hymn? We know that Louise von Hayn wrote the hymn for the birthday of her friend and fellow choir worker Christina Petterson on August 1st, 1772. Christina Petterson was also a single sister in Herrnhut and lived in the sister's house where Louise von Hayn was the choir worker. Petterson was a teacher in the girls' school. For her 36th birthday, Louise von Hayn wrote this birthday poem. At the time, and especially among Moravians, writing a poem for someone's birthday was a common practice. We have many of these birthday poems in the archives. At the time, Louise von Hayn's text was a 7-stanza poem. When it was published in the Moravian German Hymnal of 1778, it was reduced to 3 stanzas. Christian Gregor, who published the hymnal, was a heavy editor. He changed many of the hymn texts to better suit the needs of his time. For example, he left out the graphic language about blood and wounds that was not as much appreciated in later years. For decades to come, this was the standard Moravian hymnal, both in Germany and in North America. Gregor didn't do much editing to Louise von Hayn's hymn, besides taking out 4 stanzas. So what he did was he made it a shorter text. He left out 4 stanzas, but didn't change the text very much. I would like to point out something else. It only took a few years for Hayn's hymn to get published, especially when we consider that it was written as a gift to honor someone's birthday. You would not expect it to get noticed beyond the friends and relatives of the person who was celebrating their birthday. In this case, it was published in the Moravian hymn book only 6 years after it was written. I think there was a reason for the quick popularity of the hymn. I will get back to that a little later. The first English translation came 11 years later in 1789. The English translation is by Frederick William Foster. Later, he was a Moravian minister and bishop in Great Britain, but at the time, he was a clerk for the British Provincial Helpers Conference at the time that he translated the hymn. Like the German original, the English translation also became popular. And let's listen to the tune. Thank you, Gwen Michael, for recording this for us. Foster's translation is not the only translation into English. There is another translation, I Am Jesus's Little Lamb, that is in some places a little closer to the original German text. And you see it here next to the translation by Frederick William Foster. This alternate translation was introduced in the American Moravian Church in the so-called Red Hymnal of 1969. The tune in the hymnal is different, but in fact, this is the tune that is used in the German Moravian Church most frequently. In Germany, they also use the other tune, the tune we just heard. They are interchangeable. Let's listen. The Red Hymnal does not give the name of the translator or its origins. We also find this translation in the Lutheran Hymnal of 1941. So my feeling is that this translation came to us through the Lutheran Church, and tracing it back through Lutheran hymnals may reveal more information about this particular translation. And I think it's because von Hayn's hymn was popular among Protestants in Germany, and so I suppose that German immigrants to America brought the hymn with them and translated it into English at some point, not knowing an English translation already existed. The current blue hymnal of the Moravian Church has both translations. And for those of you who would like to compare the translations with the German text, here we have them next to each other. On the left, Foster's translation, in the middle, the Lutheran translation, and on the right, we have the original German. So you may want to take a screenshot and study it later. So what are the origins of Louise von Hayn's hymn? Sometimes when you do research, you come across something unexpected and completely unrelated to your research topic. That is really the fun of doing historical research, but of course it can also be very distracting and time-consuming. I was doing research for my book on early Herrnhut, and I was going through a religious periodical of the time, the Sammlung von alten und neuen theologischen Sachen, also known as the Unschuldige Nachrichten. The Unschuldige Nachrichten are considered the earliest theological journal in Germany. The Unschuldige Nachrichten contained theological book reviews, news on religion, and important historical documents. It started in 1701, and the editor was Valentin Ernst Löscher, superintendent in Dresden. Löscher was a defender of Lutheran orthodoxy. He was a defender of Lutheran orthodoxy and critical about pietism and the Enlightenment. He knew Zinzendorf and he disapproved of Zinzendorf's activities in Herrnhut. That was the reason for me to page through this periodical to find what it said about Herrnhut and Zinzendorf. But I also found other things. Looking through the index for the year 1724, this entry drew my attention. Of course, the English translation does not really explain why this drew my attention, but when we have the German title of Louise von Hayn's hymn in our head, you will understand. Ob ich gleich ein Schäfer bin, reminded me of Weil ich Jesu Schäflein bin. You can feel the meter is the same, and you don't have to know much German to see that some of the words are even in the same position. So I went to page 929 to see what this entry in the index was referring to. The reference was part of an article on religious parodies of hymns. A parody is an imitation or version of something else. In our modern use, the purpose of a parody is mostly to create comic effect. It often exaggerates the original version with the purpose of making fun. In musicology, the term parody is used slightly different. The term is used when an original is reworked for a different purpose, not necessarily to make fun of the original. This is also how the term is used in the text from 1724 that we are looking at here. A religious parody is to take a secular original and to make it into something religious. This was not uncommon at all. During the Reformation and later, secular songs were reworked to become religious hymns. The article that we are looking at is only 7 pages long, and it talks about several parodies where secular hymns have been reworked into religious hymns. On page 929, it mentions 2 parodies of a so-called shepherd song. Interestingly, it gives the text of the first stanza, and the similarities with the German version of Weil ich Jesu Schäflein bin are obvious. The shepherd becomes a little sheep or lamb. Even the staff, like from trusting his mild staff always, is here. But remember, our Moravian hymn was written in 1772, many years after this publication from 1724. The article is not about Louise von Hayn's parody, but it mentions 2 other parodies of the shepherd's song. It mentions here, ob ich gleich ein Sünder bin, and another parody, sei willkommen, Jesulein. So, ob ich gleich ein Sünder bin means although I'm only a sinner, and sei willkommen, Jesulein, the text is very different than the shepherd's song, and that is obviously a Christmas hymn, welcome, dear Jesus. And these parodies, they do not interest us so much, apart from the fact that the shepherd's song was obviously a popular source for parodies. What interests us is the additional information provided here. It says that the shepherd's song was written by Mr. Handel in Hanover, a famous court musician and musical director. This, of course, is Georg Friedrich Händel, who became the official court musician in Hanover in 1710. It is not difficult to find the text of the Shepherd's Song online. And I would like to compare the text of the Shepherd's Song here on the right in black, on the left in black, with the text of Louise von Hayn's original text. So here we have in blue on the right, the 7 stanzas. In the hymn book, 4 stanzas were left out. And here it might get a little technical, especially if you do not read German every day. So bear with me. The Schäfer or shepherd in the original, in the shepherd song, becomes a Schäflein, a little sheep in Louise von Hayn's text. Thus, she changed the perspective from the secular shepherd to the pious sheep. Oh, I already mentioned the Hirtenstab, the staff. We find that in stanza 2. There is tau or dew in stanza 2, and that can be found in Hayn's stanza 5 here, in dem Früh- und Abendtau. There's a dog in stanza 3, Spitz, that is the shepherd's dog and the shepherd's helper. Louise von Hayn has a different helper. In stanza 3, we have the, I have to shift this here, the Redeemer, the Erbarmer, that is her helper. In stanza 6, there is thirst, and it's quenched with molken. Molke is whey. The sheep's thirst in stanza 3 is quenched from dem roten Wundenbach, the red stream of wounds. The shepherd eats, where is it? Butter, Käse und Brot, butter, cheese, and bread. The sheep is fed with with water from the fountain of life, Brünnlein. Both subjects are happy and joyful. Both hymns also end with a one-line conclusion. Lustig ist die Schäferei becomes Amen ja, mein Glück ist groß. Amen je, my lot is blessed. You can find many more parallels and differences, but I hope I have made my point. I found that the Shepherd's Hymn can be found in many collections of German hymns, with lyrics that differ slightly and also with different tunes. As I said earlier, the text in the periodical has additional information about Georg Friedrich Händel. He was supposedly the author of the text and composer of the tune. At least this is how I understand the word gemacht, made. I've searched and searched in the Händel material that I had access to. And here, of course, I also felt my limitations. I'm a historian and not a musicologist. I did look at all the librettos or texts, booklets of Handel's operas that I had access to online. So you can easily imagine a shepherd appearing in one of these operas. I did not find anything. I did not find the shepherd's song in any of these operas. I did not find anything that confirmed a connection with Handel, and this may be where our source is mistaken. I did search the RISM catalog. The RISM, R-I-S-M, is the Répertoire International des Sources Musicales. That is an international catalog of musical resources anywhere in the world. The Moravian music collections in Winston-Salem, Bethlehem, Herrnhut, Zeist, Christiansfeld, and in other places are also cataloged in this catalog. The RISM catalog did not reveal any composition by Handel related to the Shepherd's Song, but it did reveal something else. When I searched for the title, this reference to a Telemann composition came up. Ob ich gleich ein Schäfer bin. and the tune also looked familiar. The original piece that this catalog entry is referring to is held at the Bavarian State Library in Munich. And luckily, this item has been digitized and is accessible online. It is part of a collection of pieces attributed mostly by Telemann. The catalog entry that describes the book assumes that indeed, confirming the title, that indeed these compositions were written by Telemann. And here is the piece number 11, and it is titled Aria, Ob ich gleich ein Schäfer bin. And let us listen to the music. And thank you again to Gwyn Michael. That is not the tune we know with Jesus Makes My Heart Rejoice, but it is the tune we know for I Am Jesus' Little Lamb. And it is, in fact, the hymn Gregor, assigned in his chorale book of 1784. It is a tune that in later editions always has been attributed to Gregor. Now we know that Gregor was not the composer of this tune. It was an older tune, and it's possibly composed by Telemann. The earliest printed American Moravian chorale book, published by Peter Wolle in 1832, follows Gregor's system, but here a different tune was assigned to Jesus Makes My Heart Rejoice. It is the tune that is still used in America with this hymn. In Germany, both tunes are used with Louise von Hayn's hymn text. So, what have we learned? We found that Louise von Hayn's hymn was in fact a parody of an earlier hymn. The Shepherd's Song was a well-known secular song, and it is very likely that the sisters in Herrnhut knew this folk song. And when she read it or sang it, they recognized that Louise von Hayn had taken an existing text and transformed it into a religious song. This must have contributed to the success of the hymn. And this, in my opinion, explains the immediate success of the hymn. Only 6 years later, after Louise von Hayn wrote the hymn, Christian Gregor included it into the new Moravian hymn book. He also included the tune into his chorale book. Because the chorale book of 1784 does not give the names of composers, people until this day have assumed Gregor was the composer of the tune. We know now that the composer is likely Telemann. So I hope you enjoyed this presentation, and I hope that we will be able to welcome you again to other presentations soon. Thank you.